Sumner Redstone and Murdoch both have made the same joke. They were asked what would happen when they died, and they both said they didn't plan to die.
Hey, this is Nehemiah from Behind the Curtain. Today we're taking a deep dive into the writing process of the creators of Succession and how they've created one of the best television shows in the last few years that is both comedic and dramatic at the same time. Enjoy.
Well, I was approached by a documentary producer initially who wanted to do something completely different, which was like the rules of business life from Rupert Murdoch's career.
But after doing some research, Armstrong decided this wasn't for him.
I don't think I can do like a documentary, like to camera, here's 10 business secrets from his career.
However, what he did find was that
there's enough to say about a family like this that it could make a compelling show, I felt.
I'd written a screenplay over a decade ago now about the real family of Rupert Murdoch. It was quite a weird tone in that it was a fictionalized future imagining of them spending some time together, and that was hard to get made and never got made. That idea came back and I did a bit more reading and the idea broadened out.
What's going on for these men in their 80s and 90s who are still packing their diaries every day? It felt like something quite basic about not wanting to give up and fearing that loss of influence and the end of your life. I started to feel there was a show about what those people are like in general and not just in the specific.
Do I want to call my dad? No, I don't want to call my dad. Do you want to call your dad?
In the actual writer's room, you would have seen a big 3 metre by 3 metre kind of panel with all the characters' names on them and a bunch of the key plots, and episode by episode, it gridded out what would happen. The writer's room, we do 4 weeks at the beginning where we talk about everything and how the show might break down, and then we break each episode, taking a week or so on each episode. After that initial 4 weeks, I like to have pretty much where we're going, and we were always heading there. In a way, that's what the whole process of running the writer's room and making the show is like, keeping it open, closing it down, keeping it open, closing it down. And anything could happen, but only this can happen. But within that, they could say anything, but they could only say this. When it feels good, a collaboration in a room is a wonderful thing, because when it's going, there's a ego-lessness, there's a building on the last idea. I would never say, no, we can't do that because that would be too much emotional. We can't do that. I guess the thing we try and do, and it sounds corny, is we try and tell the truth, and we know the characters pretty well. And so that's the barometer, I think. I guess that would be cool, but it's just not true.
Sometimes when we're talking early on about the arc of the series as a whole, I'll say something in the writer's room like, well, look, if we were just doing a tragedy, this is what would happen. And that'll be a pitch that I'll give just to explore it. And we often do that. Sometimes we'll do something like the sitcom pitch would be da-da-da-da-da, and then we'll say this is what would happen in a sitcom. I sometimes also say, well, the trashy soapy pitch would be this. And sometimes what you're doing is pitching an idea almost to encourage everyone to imagine the opposite of it. You know, you're not always pitching to try and say, this is what we should do. Sometimes you're just like looking ahead narratively, provoking other people to go, oh God, no, that's a totally unsuccession thing to do. The Succession way of doing that would be this, or that's not very Succession-y, is a phrase we use.
Because she's brought a ludicrously capacious bag. What's even in there? Huh? Flat shoes for the subway? Her lunch pail?
If I'm proud of anything about the show, it's above all trying to do complicated people. And yeah, what they do in the world is awful, and they are objectively not making choices that are good for humanity. But within that, there's a lot of room for mixed feelings, mixed emotions, for where that's come from in the broadest sense of where they are in the power structure of the world, and in the very narrow sense of where they are in the power structure of their families.
When you get to know someone, whether it's in life or a show, and you get to see where they come from and the psychological and material forces that have made them, you feel differently about them eventually. It's not an apologia for the characters in the show or how they behave, but I think it's true. People are not born evil, Machiavellian. They end up that way because of what happens to them.
People doing the right thing for the wrong reason or the wrong thing for the right reason is the meat and drink of the show. And it's the meat and drink of the show, I guess, because I feel like it's the meat and drink of life, and trying to interpret that stuff is fascinating.
I love you, but you are not serious people.
It's about a family and their needs, even as a family and as human beings. That's what gives the story. It's not the story is then imposed on the people. The actual story is pretty simple. It's about a fight for the corporation and who's on which side. And that's the easy part, but it evolves all out of the characters.
It's something we've often talked about in the writer's room, mainly in relation to the kids, that centrifugal force, the sense that the fire is only burning when those elements are all together, however much they hate, the dynamics that emerge when they're all together, the only thing that makes them feel alive, because it's the only thing that really feels real.
Obviously, fundamentally, they're driven by a need to want to seek out their father's love. I mean, I think that's clear from the nature of the show. It has something to do with that old saying about if you can't have love, the next best thing is power.
You make your own reality. And once you've done it, apparently, everyone's of the opinion it was all so fucking obvious.
Lucy Preble explains that only one character was written as a true archetype.
And that's Logan. Everybody else feel more like fleshed out real people to me, whereas Logan is archetypal, and the show invests him with a real sense of power. You're never quite sure what Logan's thinking, and of them all, he has terrible qualities, but he isn't a coward, and I think that makes him more archetypal. Jesse came with a very strong sense of who they were. I think it just came out of family dynamics and possibly just doing a lot of research into those sorts of dynastic families, both contemporary ones, but also classically. I remember we brought a historian in called Tom Holland, who specialises in ancient Rome, who gave us a session just talking about the sort of dynasties and powerful families of ancient Rome. And that sort of stuff, you know, is fascinating as well and feeds into it.
Don't be scared to write an archetype, not a stereotype, but a Homer Simpson, because you will write a crap failed dad different to somebody else who's writing that same character. So it's not a bad place to go, oh yeah, that character seems obvious to me, but it's not necessarily obvious to everyone else, and also you will have a different voice for them, probably.
I think a character is worldview, isn't it? The comedy. If you have a character, if you don't want how they view the world,
then you don't need to know all that.
Then you don't need to write what they did when they were a teenager. You just got the voice, and that's all you need.
We can't be like, Tom's going to turn into Spider-Man. It has to feel like, oh shit, he could get there. Does it feel true along every step? Would we want to go on that journey? And is that where we're going? I would never be like, okay, I keep on thinking of stupid examples, Kendall to become a major league baseball player. How can we get there? That's tough, right? But is it latent that Tom could, given his relationship to power and his feelings, could he get there? Yeah, I think he could. So is it interesting to follow him? Yeah, it is. Both things have to be happening at once. We have to have a destination we really believe in, and then we follow the steps, which also have to be fun and keep on reinforcing themselves.
But I agree. I think there are times, if Jesse doesn't keep me in check, I go a bit frenzy and have them learning from their mistakes and becoming nicer people. And Jesse has to keep saying, no, that's no good. You can't decide Roman's sweet, really. He's not going to change.
Nice vest, Wamsgans. It's so puffy.
Thank you, Roman.
Was it stuffed with your hopes and dreams?
I think Freud said that there's no such thing as a joke, but I think that in a way there's no such thing as only a joke. I think almost all jokes have some meaning coded into them.
There should not be any lines which are single transferable jokes, right? They should all be expressive of character, and they shouldn't all be zingers. The people should be doing crap jokes and good jokes and jokes which have the correct frame of reference so that they can only come out of their mouth. Oftentimes, a monosyllabic response can be the appropriate and most funny response in any situation. So it's just that, even though we love the jokes, it should never be, how can we get this in? Or if X can't say that, maybe we give it to Y. That's a telltale sign that something's gone way wrong.
If I cringe any harder, I might become a fossil.
If you've got good characters, that will always produce more funny stuff than trying to think of the shape of a hilarious line. If you find it amusing, the characters and the situation are carrying the 90% of your work. And if you try and throw in a very crafted joke or one-liner, it'll often fall flat compared to just the real thing that one person would say to another in the middle of that very stressful situation. If you're trying to work out a plot, it doesn't necessarily have to read that funny on the page, as long as it reads dramatically, because then if your characters are good characters, they will react in amusing ways.
That rap he did in the last season.
L to the OG, dude be the OG, and he playing.
It can only live with his total belief that this is a good idea and that he's cool doing it, and that's why it's also so unwatchable.
Comedy works better in a small room. You get better stuff from those interactions.
This is the safe room, okay? This is the panic room. We're safe here.
What? How is it safe?
Calm down.
It's just a room.
If we get them in this room, it's probably going to be fun. People with those physical constraints, whether they're private jets or at the back of a shareholders meeting or a kid's bedroom.
We had this idea of there being a safe room, and then we were thinking if they're all in one room, it's difficult to keep all the stories going without everyone hearing what's going on. And then we thought, it'd be much funnier if there was 2 safe rooms, a kind of first-class safe room and a kind of business-class safe room. And of course, Tom would be very upset to find himself not in the first-class safe room.
What the fuck? We got this shit room.
And then, because this is very near where Shiv has suggested to Tom that they have an open marriage, and he hasn't really been able to express his feelings about this, we came up with this idea of him pelting Greg with the water bottles, which is all there really is in the room. And I remember when I wrote it thinking, I hope this will be funny, and I hope people get that it's about his marriage and not just about Greg. Matthew McFadden played the scene with such emotion and poignancy that it became an incredibly moving and sad scene, as well as hopefully being a bit funny.
I've got a keen appreciation, I think, that people say a lot of things, and the terrible thing is that sometimes what they say is true and sometimes it's not, and it's hard to distinguish between those two, even for the people saying them. I'm always amenable to thinking there might be another truth under the truth. There's a yes but quality, and also quality of people are constantly surprising you, enraging you, disappointing you, delighting you in ways that you didn't see coming, but then once you see them, you're like, of course. One of the most frequent things that human beings do is just say the opposite. How are you? I'm great. How's the company? It's going great. Normally people are lying. So that's my normal approach to writing a scene, is that everyone's lying the whole time, and it's fun for the audience because we see it and we know it.
I think of every character as having almost being like an instrument and having their own cadence, but also how quickly they think or how many words they say. Roman is really fun to write for because he can say anything, right? But he also speaks a lot. Logan is generally the most powerful person. He says very little, but he's also like the shark in Jaws. Like, you don't want to overuse him, and you don't want to always just have him come in and say, "Fuck off."
Research consultants were a crucial part of making Succession feel real. Business consultants, wealth consultants, political consultants, and more.
We're also deeply committed to rarely doing anything in the show that we can't find an example of somewhere happening. Jesse really, really doesn't like it getting into soap opera or operatic or fantasy places, and just make sure that we're not doing anything that feels convenient from a dramatic perspective.
So I remember being given a very hard time I'd written an episode in the first season about Thanksgiving. And the rich consultant had said to me, "This is all completely wrong. Rich people don't have coats. They go from their car to their jet to their building. Their shoes are only ever on carpet." And because it was Thanksgiving, I had Marsha saying, "Oh, it's lunchtime, I've made turkey or something." And he was like, "Oh my God, Marsha wouldn't know where the kitchen was. She wouldn't deign to say the word turkey. You've got to rewrite this."
It's great to have a bit of an iceberg situation, so not a ton of it might end up in the show, but we know that world. And there's a Billy Wilder thing about a movie being like, you either trust it or you don't. And I think people hopefully can sense that sense of trust of like, yeah, that sounds weird, but yes, that sounds right. I've never been on one of those planes, but yeah, that probably checks out, especially if it's weird and not what you initially imagine.
The business stuff is meant to go over your head. The whole point was to get the details right, but not to over-explain it. In the very basic way, it's like people should know, okay, like it's good for the family if this happens. It's bad for the family if this happens, but you don't have to get mired in the detail. In season 2, Shiv is talking about calling in crisis PR companies, and she's like, should we call in like Pinks and this? And she throws some names off.
Do we have outside PR?
Pink's passed. We've got Jay Preston.
And then Jesse wanted to cut the word crisis PR. And I was like, oh, but isn't it helpful for the audience to know, because we've made up the names, like no one will know what these company names are. But the idea is that from the context, hopefully you get what it is, but it was also, she wouldn't explain to them who these companies are. And so he'll choose realism and speed over explaining something to the audience. I think the challenge is also that the real world, the things that some of these people do in business, in their families, in wealth is so outrageous that it's hard to top it. Like sometimes like our version of it is less, because if you actually recreated the literal story, it just wouldn't be believable.
Because it's easy to have the impulse to write, and it's easy to enjoy that floaty feeling of one day I'm going to do something, and as soon as you start writing it, if you're a normal human being, your reaction will be, and probably also if you're a good writer, will be, this is terrible. So to get from that bit of like feeling that feeling of I might have something to say, to writing that terrible draft that you hate, anything that'll get you through that, and whether that's like having a date in the diary that we're going to shoot this little taster for YouTube, or if it's you've got a friend who you trust, or a group. Me and Sam met on a creative writing group, but you can do an informal one. It could be something you do with pals or something online, but anything to make you finish that draft and then do the next one.
Have you ever visited the California Pizza Kitchen?
No.